6 weeks ago, I became aware of Lynnhurst's 20th anniversary of becoming an open and affirming congregation, and was asked if I would share why this is important to me. And at first, I really didn't have an answer, so I met with Pastor Cynthia to understand the meaning of this statement and the process you all undertook. I assumed that all UCC churches were open and affirming, but I found that that is not the case. The members of Lynnhurst shared thoughts, reflections, and experiences, aired differences of opinion, and eventually voted to embrace this covenant. So why is an open and affirming church important to me? I'll answer by sharing with you a bit about myself. We all have external, visible traits that make us who we are. Two of those, for me, are my Japanese ancestry and my short stature. Growing up, I was bullied like many kids. I had racial statements said to me which are not appropriate for church. Kids made slanty eyes at me, exaggerating how I look different. I have had complete strangers in Minneapolis and elsewhere walk up to me and speak to me in Japanese, thinking they are somehow being smart by showing me their apparent fluency in another language. Some, again, complete strangers in public will ask me where I am from or from where I am visiting. When I respond Minneapolis, they condescend to me. No, where are you from? When I reply I was born in California and grew up in Colorado, they are incredulous in that I can't possibly be American. Finally, I will tell them my ancestors are from Japan, and then I ask them, where are you from? I don't mind these questions in a social setting, but not from people I've never met. Of all places, this occurred most recently at the American-Swedish Institute, as I purchased Christmas ornaments. People have told me and my family to get back on the boat and go back to where we came from. Once this occurred at the New York City Marathon in 1999, not in some isolated backcountry town in the South, but in Manhattan. In the 5th grade, a group of teenage boys living across the street would taunt me with racial epithets almost every day as I walked home from school. My parents, too, were not immune from this. We lived in suburban Denver at the time. It was one of the few times I ever saw my father really angry as he walked across the street one day to confront them. Sometime later, they shot out our living room window with a BB gun. We called the police and moved away a short time later. I've heard stories from my grandparents having their school books thrown out the window of their school bus, and the unconscionable and unforgivable internment of one of my great-grandfathers. And I need not recall the difficulties faced by my parents growing up in the 1940s. Pearl Harbor, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. My father, who was one, was on the island of Oahu during Pearl Harbor. My mother, who was born in 1942, was in rural South Texas. Being short has been easier. Clothes and shoes have been particular challenges. At times I've been relegated to the back seat of a car because I do not need the legroom, or being confronted about reclining my seat on a plane for the same reason. I thought I had paid for that space and used to enjoy a little recline, but I don't do that anymore. Perhaps the hardest part of all is when a young child, so innocent and unfiltered, says, "Mommy, look at that little man. This happened last week at Target. I feel exposed like the emperor with no clothes." But it is all those things unseen that have been most difficult of all. Depression, anxiety, recovery from addiction, and of course being gay. It is hard and expends an enormous amount of willpower and energy to conceal one's true identity. Being what I am not being what I am. Taking girls to homecoming and prom to make a show of it. Compartmentalizing in college, depending on what group I was with and what they might think if they knew I was gay. Editing myself, talking to others about weekend plans, relationships, etc. Coming out to high school friends, my sister, and then my parents, and then to professional colleagues and patients. It is an incredibly difficult and emotionally traumatic process which took me years. No doubt my sexuality contributed in a significant way to my struggle with mental illness and addiction. But it has been through the love, understanding, and support of my family, friends, and of course, Dave, my partner, that I am able to stand before you as my whole integrated self. I've learned the easiest way to deal with it is to just be myself and not worry about what other people think. Show up and be myself. What I imagine it was like for most people growing up, only I didn't or couldn't figure that out until I was 35 or 40 years old. Growing up, I had no gay role models. Our society at the time did not have a roadmap to show me the way. How to date, socialize, get engaged, marry, plan a family, have kids, get a job, retire, become grandparents. None of it mapped out or really even possible in many ways until just over 1 year ago. And still, despite the Supreme Court ruling, it remains difficult in many parts of the country. So that's why an open and affirming community is important. I now show up and bring my whole self. You chose to be open, unclosed, accessible, unbarred, unblocked, unburdened, unimpeded, and unshut. You chose to be affirming, approving, assertive, guaranteeing, confirming, okay with, supporting, truthful, and validating. You live in reality and embrace things as they are. You have ventured outside your community, the safety of what is familiar. You see the world as it is. You show by your actions and not just your words the depth and commitment of your beliefs. To summarize James chapter 2, verse 26, faith without action is dead. So I'll close now by telling you about a t-shirt my sister and niece found at a Pride event in Denver last weekend. It said, "We the people" means everyone. Thanks for listening.
I'll stand here if you don't mind. That's a hard act to follow. This will be a bit of a history lesson. I hated history in high school because I had a terrible teacher, and I've embraced it more in my old age, so I hope you'll stay with me. We came to Lynnhurst first in Advent of 75 when I was very pregnant with our first child, Alice, and kind of waddled in and felt like I was the first pregnant woman to come into the church for a while, and people were like, "No, you can't leave," you know. And then I said to the minister's wife, "Oh, well, I had grown up in the United Church of Christ in the Evangelical Reform version of that in Elmhurst, Illinois, but my husband had grown up in the Presbyterian church, and I said, well, we were going to look at the Presbyterian church in the neighborhood, and she said, oh, you won't like it." Okay, well, you know, we had looked at some other churches. So there we were, and happy to have found a church home that was close, and it was clear that my Roman Catholic recovering father, who was then a member of a United Church of Christ, it was important that the baby be baptized. So that was part of our journey. Fast forward, 1993, that daughter is a senior at Washburn High School. This was a different day and age. This was an age when you could be fired from work if people found out you were gay. There was a lot of harassment at high school then. She came out, I had suspected this, but she came out to us in that spring before she graduated, and thank God had found a college that was great about those issues. Grinnell, shout out to Grinnell. And, but she said, I don't want you to tell anyone. And I obviously process things by talking. That's my personality type. So this was like, ooh, this is going to be hard. I did respect. She said I could tell our minister, Bob Griggs. I could tell our choir director, Joe Amico, who had come out to the congregation. And I think I could tell people in the greater UCC church, like that didn't live in Minnesota, and you know, and I knew a lot of them, so that was very helpful, you know. So and I wasn't supposed to go to PFLAG, where I could have gotten some support, parent rallies, gay, you know, which met right over at Mayflower. I could ride my bike there, you know, but no, you know, eventually I went there. But so we had this process. So I, you know, talked with Bob, and the person that was the most helpful was Joe Amico, our choir director. He had been a Methodist minister, and when he came out, they were not going to put him in a church, you know, after that. But he refused to lead. He was going to make them kick him out. He was really happy when I started talking about Spirit of Lakes at church, which was in the process of getting standing in the Minnesota Conference. It was the first primarily gay and lesbian church in the conference, and I was on a committee that dealt with that and stuff, and he was like, because I was on the committee that hired him, and he said he was divorced, but he didn't say he was gay. I think he thought we wouldn't hire him then. But then I think as he became more comfortable, he was willing to do that. And my way of dealing with our daughter coming out, she's actually bisexual. You may find this confusing because she's married to a man now, but she's been in different relationships. My way of dealing with that was going to the National United Church of Christ gathering for gay. It was called For Gay and Lesbian Concerns, and it was taking place in St. Louis. I was going to St. Louis anyway to work on a resolution at the synod, which was happening after that, called Shalom with Cuba. We were trying to get the blockade lifted, you know. Finally, something's happening on that, but, you know, so if you're patient, you know, things happen. And it was just a wonderful experience for me to connect with all sorts of different people. I mean, this was in the time when AIDS was a death sentence. There were men with AIDS at the meeting. The AIDS quilt was there. I mean, it was a wonderful experience. And a few weeks ago, I was able to experience another national gathering, which is now called the ONA National Gathering, and that was also a wonderful experience. But some of the truths I've gleaned from that is being an open and affirming congregation can really help your membership growth nationally. They've done studies on this. It's not just gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, questioning whatever people and their allies and their family that want to be in an open and affirming church. It's people with young children or whatever, because they appreciate those values. And so I'm really happy that's true. Although I, a woman of little hope, really did not think Lynnhurst would become open and affirming in '93. And that was also a problem because all three of our children have considered seminary, but would not have been happy being ordained in a congregation that was not open and affirming. Our son David has always been an ally, and that's gotten him beat up in junior high. So these things happen. And our youngest child is transgender, and if you think having a gay child is a problem, try that road. It's a whole nother thing. And even Spirit of Lakes was not prepared to deal with having a trans woman show up. They, and they learned how to deal with it. She's a wonderful person, Barbara Satin, and she's been on national boards and things and spoke at the latest national gathering. So one thing I will give, Dean and I and other people were on the task force that brought workshops to Lynnhurst. One of them, our choir director, did one that he had done nationally called Don't Bash Me with Your Bible, which looks at very specific texts in the Bible that have been used against LGBT folks. And we also had people from PFLAG. One of them was just totally blown away when his daughter called and said, I'm gay, and he was kind of like, so what, And she said, but Dad, I could be fired. This was like in 93 or 94. And he was like horrified. I mean, he was like this big financial guy and blah, blah, blah. And he had no idea. So that he and his wife became very active in PFLAG, and they were the people that came here and did the workshop. So I thought we had a really wonderful process, and I had finally just let go of the ending. I thought, well, if they don't vote to do that, I can live with it. My kids may leave the church, but they'll find another congregation. There are other open and affirming churches in the world. And but we voted pretty substantially. I mean, I think there was one no vote, and I keep wondering who it was, but I haven't figured that out. And I have talked with other churches that have gone through this process, and I really do think Lynnhurst had the best process. But I think there's more to do. I think we need to re-examine our what we read today during our statement. And one of the issues that was not, on the radar then was transgender. We have had a workshop. My son Eli and the former camp director at Pilgrim Point, who transitioned from Dale to D, did a workshop here many years ago. And I think that's an issue we need to deal with and maybe put it more explicitly in our statement. So I've talked enough. Thank you for listening, and you're welcome to ask me questions later.